Welcome to Love for the Truth Radio, a program devoted to encouraging you to be a contender of the faith in an ever-changing church culture. On Love for the Truth Radio, we will discuss current issues and challenging views along with biblical truth that can affect our Christian worldview and how we live out our faith. And now, here's your host, Cindy Hartline.
Welcome to the program. We are living in perilous times. Racial radicalism is growing stronger. Immorality is on the rise. Bullying is at an all-time high, and our educational system is becoming corrupt and indoctrinating our kids with postmodern and liberal thought as we continue to push away Christian Judeo-ethics. There are tons of red flags in our educational system, and it may be time to homeschool. But is it possible? Well, our guest, Hedy Negron, says yes, it is possible, and she is here today with a wealth of information and encouragement to help us make that most important decision to homeschool our kids. Hedy Negron is an author, researcher, and conference speaker and Bible study teacher for Christian women. As a homeschool educator, Hedy authored and designed curriculum for several courses, including meteorology, government, robotics, and Estonian language and culture. Hedy taught GED classes at the local college for the past 6 years, applying her homeschool skills with adults. Hedy's desire to teach children and women have grown from the joy and fulfillment experienced as she transformed from a lost young lady to one who has served Jesus with a love and purpose for 30 years. And for 25 years, Hedy has successfully homeschooled her 5 children. Hedy and her husband Sam are currently empty nesters, but they are enjoying their 5 grandchildren. Welcome to Love for the Truth Radio, Hedy Negron. It's a pleasure to have you with us.
Thank you, Cindy. I'm very grateful for this opportunity.
Hedy, I'm so excited about this show because I know there's so many people that have so many questions about being home educators. Give us a few good reasons why our listeners should consider homeschooling.
Oh, that's great. Great question. First of all, parents are specifically told in the scriptures to teach their children of Him, about His works, about His love, about His salvation. So we are their first instructors, and we should remain so whether we're in the homeschool capacity or at home after school. We don't abdicate that role regardless of where our children are learning academics. Mm-hmm. Homeschooling is great because it affords the opportunities to weave God's truths into all aspects of teaching, in addition to very specific Bible studies. History, science, and literature, they all come alive when the Lord is at the center. Mm. Studying becomes complete when the Lord is its foundation, and He is the truth. And when that truth is void, and God isn't allowed to be considered in historical events, scientific discoveries, or literature, then education is empty and false. Mm-hmm. Homeschooling also provides opportunities to build healthy family relationships. Mm-hmm. We were really blessed to see how the decisions we made for our children at home were based on love, a commitment to them, and an understanding of each individual child's needs. There's also more discussion and dialogue between family members. The kids can come to us very specifically with questions. The older children, they help teach the younger. We saw our older ones teaching them, helping them to read. They worked on projects together. I have an example when they were younger and we were doing a mural of the United States in a small co-op group we had with 3 other families. Well, it was great to see because the older kids, of course, were much more detailed and precise in the mural. But the little ones, even toddlers, they were allowed to be part of the mural by painting maybe the background, the things that weren't as intricate. So here you have a variety of age groups working together, and it was just a beautiful thing to see. They weren't artificially segregated by age, and that helped the children have patience with the younger ones, and it helped the younger ones learn how to emulate the older ones.
Yeah, that's just really beautiful, Hedy. And you know, we don't see enough of that today. Families are very, very busy, and they're on the go, and rarely even see their children until they get home late at night, you know, and then they're ready to eat and go to bed. So that's a beautiful picture of building healthy family relationships. You know, Hedy, we talked about this earlier, about the corrupt educational system that teaches non-truths. Give us some examples about our corrupt educational system.
Well, there was one that really struck me because I did teach in GED classes, and I was able to see firsthand the curriculum that's out there. And beyond a doubt, every history book that we were provided with didn't teach the Civil War as an entire canvas. The students weren't getting the whole picture of the Civil War. It was taught only as a slavery issue, whereas it was about states' rights. And also, this is a huge one, the majority of deaths were whites who fought for a cause that was concerning fellow humans. So imagine how differently a child, whether black or white, would perceive the other race after learning that. I believe the way the Civil War is taught, it feeds racism because the only focus is on slavery and the wrongdoers who certainly were very wrong, but it's not on those who stood for the truth and came alongside their brethren at the cost of their very lives. So that's one example I have that just broke my heart as I worked with inner city people and just realized that they don't have the full picture of the Civil War. And it's just so wrong because it divides us more instead of pulling us together as humans made in the image of God.
Yes. Yeah. And, you know, we had this conversation earlier about the rise of Common Core right now, the communistic academics that we see taking place. Do you know anything about the Common Core?
I do. I know that it's a progressive, uniform curriculum. It's laced with moral relativism, and it leaves very little room for individualized education. The claims to make all students college-ready that Common Core has, they have been successfully challenged on many levels. In my opinion, Common Core is the polar opposite of home education, with its emphasis on computer-based learning and far less teacher-student interaction.
Yeah, and it seems like we're missing out with our children today that intimacy that we once had, you know, with that type of fellowship, discipleship, or like a teacher mentoring a young student. And we seem to be missing that today, and we're seeing the fruit of that too. What about the gender agenda? I know that I heard about that recently, that there are like 17 different types of genders now that they're saying that children can become. That's something that we can avoid if we homeschool. What do you know about the gender agenda?
Yes, I do know you can avoid that if you homeschool. And what I do know about it was that at a very young age, they start teaching the gender agenda in kindergarten, that there are various genders, that genders can be chosen. It's not necessarily what you're born with.
Yes.
And that's just a heinous crime against children to teach them such absolute falsehoods where black is white and white is black.
Right.
I do know that there are many cases of parents who have opted out of the sex education that Common Core offers to children.
Yes.
And since I'm not in the system, I'm not exactly sure how they do it, but it's something that parents have to be very aware of.
Yeah, especially today because it is getting worse. So we have to be aware of who's teaching our kids and what they're teaching our kids. Hedy, I'd like to move on to what are the main hindrances of even considering homeschooling? I know that there's a lot of people that feel like they'd like to, but they just can't get to the point where they're actually doing it. What are some of the hindrances?
Well, one of the first one is people don't feel equipped. We certainly all do feel ill-equipped often as parents or as a spouse. Any calling requires confidence, but how do we get confidence? Well, confidence comes by preparing And then after you've prepared, you've done your homework, you've read about it, you've questioned people, you've been counseled, you take a faith step and you just do it. I'll give you an example. What I hear most when I speak to women about homeschooling or when they have questions for me, most often I hear those who opt out is they say, I don't have patience. Well, the fruit of the Spirit takes time to cultivate.
Yes, it does.
Perhaps this is the precise thing that the Lord wants to use in your life to teach patience. We don't hear people say, I don't have kindness, I don't have gentleness. It seems other parts of the fruit we don't excuse, but when it comes to patience, we can make excuses for it. So we have to be careful that if we don't feel equipped, we're not using it as an excuse. If God is calling you to do something, He will equip you.
Amen to that. And a lot of people say, well, we just can't, I hear this all the time, we can't make it financially. I know you have a testimony about that, but what do you think about that, Hedy? As far as homeschooling and taking that step of faith for people who feel like they can't make it financially?
Well, there are a few questions to consider in the financial area. The first one is, can we simplify? You really need to sit down with your spouse and figure out if you can simplify your expenses somewhere. Second thing, is there a way to bring in extra income, perhaps in the evenings or weekends? Throughout the years that we homeschooled, my husband freelanced. So he had a full-time job, and he also did freelance on the side, and I helped him with that. I did all the bookkeeping, sometimes booking events for him. So there are creative ways of bringing in extra income. And thirdly, I'd recommend read Dave Ramsey's works on finances and see if you can find a working solution, because he truly leads the finances all to God, showing that it all belongs to God, and you'll be surprised to see how there are ways you can make it work. Yeah,
and you know what? I've seen so many people take that step of faith, and guess what? It is working. There's another thing that's a big hindrance that I've come against, not come against, but have found with young women, and that's the culture war of just, especially those that have gone to college, have a career, they have to lay that down, and now they're going to be what they say merely homeschool mothers. So what about this culture war, Hedy, that's going on?
Well, again, that takes being strong and firm and understanding who you are in Christ. We aren't called to be popular in the culture. Sure, some won't approve. There might be opposition from relatives. But if the Lord has led you to homeschool, it's Him you must obey. You have to stop listening to the voices around you, because our worth does not come in our employment, our position. Our worth comes in the Lord. And whatever He's called us to do, we just have to obey it. I'll give an example. After our first oldest son graduated from the United States Air Force Academy, as a matter of fact, I think it was graduation day, a relative who had been very opposed to homeschooling all along finally admitted to me and said, well, maybe we were wrong after all.
Isn't that something, so after all those years?
There were years of disapproval, but I know my approval came from the Lord.
Yeah, amen to that. And your oldest son, the child that you homeschooled, he became valedictorian because he went to high school in his 11th and 12th year, right? And I believe you said that
yes.
See, so there we go. There you go, folks, We'll be going on a break, and so please stay tuned. And we'll be back with Hedy Negron, author, researcher, and conference speaker for Christian women, and also a homeschool mother who has had success with all 5 of her children. We'll be right back.
You're listening to Love for the Truth Radio. We'll be right back, so please stay tuned.
If you're a first-time listener, you'll find that on Love for the Truth Radio, we discuss news and views through a biblical worldview. We believe that the Bible is the inherent Word of God and the absolute truth that should be applied to every aspect of life. We don't proclaim to have a cap on the truth, but we do have a love for biblical truth. So please take everything you hear on this radio show to study and prayer. And thank you for listening to Love for the Truth Radio.
If you just tuned in, we're talking to Hedy Negron, homeschool mom for 25 years. Hedy, you made a decision to homeschool your 5 children at a time when it really wasn't popular. Your husband wasn't making a lot of money and you weren't a certified teacher. Can you share your testimony, why and how you got started?
Sure. This is a fun testimony. It's a great memory. I attended a Bible study in my neighborhood when our oldest was only a baby, maybe about 2 or so. The leader had 5 children who wowed me. I was recently saved, so I hadn't been around children who obey, who are pleasant to each other, who speak politely with adults, and overall they showed love and respect to the family. I was really impressed with their children every time I went to the study, and I thought, I want that. Then I realized they homeschool, and I thought, that's really weird. What do you do? Now, remember, this was in the 80s. And I said, you can do that? I didn't even know it was legal.
Right.
And after knowing them for several months and watching them, the seeds were planted, and I had a few years to convince my husband that it was a good idea.
Wow. That's awesome. You know, Hedy, you believe that home education helps build family relations, and you did share with us in the first segment a little bit about that. But you do believe that it's deeper than that it's the key and core of a strong society. Why? I mean, how does homeschooling build healthy relationships in the way of a unit of society? You talked about a unit of society from Genesis. We spoke earlier about that. Why don't you elaborate on that?
Yeah, well, when we go back to Genesis, who did God bring to Adam as a helpmate? Eve. And what did he tell them? To be fruitful and multiply. In school settings, from an early age, the children are separated by age groups. The parents are likewise separated. If it's not very carefully attended, the members do drift apart. Homeschooling provides daily opportunities to learn tolerance, kindness, sharing, concern for others, love for others. And I must add, we were never exclusive. We always belonged to co-ops. We participated in community outreaches and activities. The teens attended community college. We made sure throughout the years that they did have input, interaction, and instruction from others besides us. We were not isolationists because that's dangerous. But the family unit, as God created it, is the foundation of society. And I think it's very evident, too, when you look at what's going on with the family in the secular world we're living in. It is under attack.
It is. Absolutely, it's under attack. And, you know, and we're seeing the fruit of that, too, in our kids, in society. You know, I remember back in the day when the worst thing a child could do was talk when they weren't supposed to and chew gum. And now the worst thing we're hearing is kids shooting and murdering other children right at school. So we've come a long way, and I believe it's since 1963. We have left God out of our schools, out of our children's education. And, you know, everybody talks about evolution, you know, rather than creation. We know that in the Christian circles. And so, you know, there's a lot that's being taught today. We talked about that in segment 1, about postmodern thought and Common Core that has entered in. And, you know, in our previous conversation, Hedy, you said that secular curriculums are rewriting history and our kids are not getting the truth. And we did speak a little bit about that in segment 1, but why don't you elaborate a little bit more? Give us more examples.
Sure. There are a few examples. I have to say, once I started homeschooling my children, and especially as they grew older, I realized how inadequate my education was. There was so much I did not know until I taught them.
Wow.
When the Constitution was being written, how many of our students know that the Founding Fathers prayed at the Constitutional Convention? Before they made decisions, they prayed to God, specifically to guide them. Do they know that Columbus, this was a quote by Columbus, It was the Lord who put into my mind, I could feel his hand upon me, the fact that it would be possible to sail from here to the Indies. All who heard of my prospect rejected it with laughter, ridiculing me. There is no question that the inspiration was from the Holy Scriptures.
Wow.
I had no idea that Columbus was a Christian, that he even said anything remotely Christian.
Right.
Science, how many discoveries. When we started reading and studying science, we were amazed how many scientific discoveries were made by Christians. The Gutenberg printing press, the reason that press was invented was specifically to print the Bible for the common person. So these are just a few examples of how Christian truth, Christian inventors have been deleted from history. I mean, they're in history, but we don't get the full picture of who they were and what was the driving force. It was God in their lives.
Wow. And that's something because, like I said before, in 1963, we took prayer out of school, but guess what? We took a lot more out of school. We took God out of almost everything that we learn, and our children's not getting the full truth, not getting the total picture. I noticed that in the curriculums, there's a lot of curriculums that are God-focused, which I think is interesting. Give us examples, Hedy. Would you suggest that, well, we'll talk about that later, about parents buying them even if they can't homeschool, but give us examples of God-focused curriculums.
Sure. There are different publishers. For example, there's Christian Liberty Press, Bob Jones University Press, Alpha Omega, Becca. These are all publishers who publish the full curriculum. They will publish something that's a child needs the entire year. They'll do a whole first grade worth, a whole second grade's worth. You can also purchase curriculum piece by piece. There are many others that offer curriculum that can be purchased independently of an entire set. Definitely look into them because it's a good place to start with a publisher who's got the whole year laid out for you. I designed my own as time went on. I was picking and choosing from various publishers and tailoring it to the needs of the children and to me as a teacher. I had to like the curriculum I used. If I didn't like it, I ditched it.
Right. So give us an example of the God-focused curriculums, just like one little example of how the kids are learning Bible along with their other, studies.
Oh, yeah. So if they're learning, the curriculum will often interface the two. So if they're learning about history, the Bible study will be actually built into it. So that they go together. So if you're also in science, they often did that. They were interrelated curriculums. And I don't have a specific one before me, but there are so many options out there. Parents have to just take the time to look them up on the web, go to Christian book distributors, look at examples of different curriculums, go to curriculum fairs, which we'll talk about later, I believe, and peruse what's out there, because there are so many options for a parent to choose from nowadays where Christian truths are built into history and science, even math.
Wow, and that's exciting. And you know what? If we want to give our kids a good biblical education, it may be time to homeschool our kids. And Hedy, when I think about your 5 children, I mean, we talked about your oldest son before. He was a graduate of the U.S. Air Force Academy. He's currently serving as a pilot. His wife, along with his wife, they host and teach Bible studies at their home group. He was also the valedictorian of his school. So we're seeing that homeschooling produces really successful educational or educated kids. Tell us a little bit about your oldest daughter.
Okay, sure, I will. And it's interesting you mention that because before I get into her, I want to say our emphasis was on godly training and on character, godly character building. So the academic successes they have, those are really icing on the cake.
Wow.
When the children learn to respond in a Christian manner and they learn about the world in a godly manner, it's amazing what God will do. So as I share this, I stand in awe of what God has done. Our oldest daughter, in her college years, she was an intern for Focus on the Family Institute. She loved working there out in Colorado with them. After she graduated, she worked with the Navigators in Colorado Springs, and she was working with them, ministering to cadets at the Air Force Academy, specifically the female cadets. She's presently devoting her time to full-time motherhood and support of her husband, who's also an Air Force pilot, and she ministers to women in her church all the time.
Wow, so we're already seeing the fruit of your oldest children. We have more time, so why don't you talk about your middle daughter? She recently graduated, I believe.
Yes, she did. She graduated with her master's degree in neuroscience on a full scholarship in a PhD program.
Wow.
She has organized and led Bible studies at her graduate school. She's been on missionary trips to reach the poor for Christ. So I make sure to mention both because the academics are not what's most important. What's most important has always been their Christian character, but we see the fruit and the blessing of it.
Yes.
The thought that she was offered a full scholarship was just a blessing beyond measure for us.
And yes, I see that. That's amazing. And now your younger son is currently a senior political science major. Why don't you,
yes.
Why don't you tell us a little bit about him?
Excuse me, I'm sorry. He's actually written a science fiction trilogy ebook. It's out as an ebook. They'll carry on sacrifices. He's written the first 2 books. The third one is in the works, and it's a good, safe book. There aren't anything in there that's of the evil, of the dark realm. He wrote it as a good, clean book and a safe book for young people, especially boys, who maybe aren't too fond of reading, and this could lure them in. He works on campus with International Justice Mission and has a heart for those who are in need. He has served in inner city with children as a volunteer and a mentor for many years.
Wow, that's so interesting. Hedy, why don't you give the audience your son's name and the name of his books?
Sure. His name is Luke. He goes by the name of Luke Edison. That's his pen name. Luke Edison, and his book is Valkyrion Sacrifices.
Okay.
And it's geared for ages about 10 to 12 and up.
We're going on a break. We've heard some of the testimony from Hedy Negron, so please stay tuned. You're not going to want to miss it. We have a lot more information to share with you, so please stay tuned.
Many would agree that we are living in unprecedented times. Grave immorality is on the rise, as in the days of Noah and Sodom and Gomorrah. There are wars and rumors of wars as nations rise against nations. Prophecy is being fulfilled as the birth pangs become quicker and harder. These are the signs of the return of Jesus Christ. There is one sign often left untaught. Jesus also told the disciples in the Olivet Discourse to take heed that no man deceive you. This warning applies to us too. Deception has infiltrated the churches through many false teachings and movements, making apostasy paramount. As contenders of the faith, we do our best to research and discuss these false teachings for you, the listener. Thank you for having a love for the truth.
Welcome back. I'm Cindy Hartline, your host for today. And we are here with Hedy Negron. She is a conference speaker for women, an author. She's also a homeschooling mom, or she was a homeschooling mom for 25 years. And Hedy, we did mention about 4 of your children on the last segment, and I'd really like to get to your youngest daughter. Why don't you tell us a little bit about your youngest daughter? We don't want to leave her out.
Sure, we don't want to leave her out. heard that for years, how she was left out of things. There aren't as many photos of her as everyone else, so we better make sure we get her in here. She is currently a sophomore in college as an exercise science major, and she's been a natural leader in her places of employment. Recently, she served as the youngest manager at a theater. She's just a leader, and she lands these positions. Wow. She ran the local community pool over the summer. She volunteers as a teacher mentor for inner-city children. She lovingly ministers to these inner-city children as a lifeguard during the summers. She's done that for about 5 years now, and I just love seeing her heart for the children who are poor and disadvantaged.
Wow. And like you said before, it all has a lot to do with building that strong, healthy, loving family. So just homeschooling is not all about just curriculum, what they're learning, but they're learning to get along as a family unit. And I think that's what we need to emphasize that, because I don't know if many people really think about that aspect of homeschooling. I think it's you have a beautiful testimony, beautiful children. I attest to that because I know you personally, Hedy, and you're a good friend, and I know your children. Hedy, a lot of people say, okay, now I know the outcome, that's great, and they might even have a vision or dream, oh, I would love my children to grow up like that, just like your testimony when you went to that Bible study. You saw the woman's children and how well-behaved they were and respectful they were, and you wanted to bring your children up. But it does take some bit of sacrifice, but it's good sacrifice, and it's well worth it. And Hedy, why don't we get into giving the audience a picture of a day-to-day, what happens day-to-day while you're homeschooling? I mean, what if a child gets sick? I mean, I'm sure they have hundreds of questions.
Yeah, that's a loaded question, because just as life has seasons, homeschool has its own seasons. And they depend on many factors. Age of the children, you just mentioned sickness, sometimes stress in the family. Yes. So what I'll do is put together a little picture of, let's say, elementary-age children, what happened in our house.
Okay.
First of all, I had a lesson plan, an individual one for every child. Wow. I have to be organized and know what I'm doing, so I could check off that we've covered it. The children need the organization, because then once they're old enough, they can look at their own lesson plan and they know what's required of them. So that was foremost, making a lesson plan for each child. But here's the funny thing. It just went with the seasons. When the kids were little, the first one up was allowed to go with me when I jogged. I would jog 2 miles almost every day. And what the child would do, the first one up was allowed to take their bike and ride along beside me. So there's the start to our homeschool day. A little different than most school teachers. After that, the first thing on the agenda was Bible and prayer. That was foremost. We would just spend some time in the Word and in prayer together as a family. We had prayer cards that we kept in a box, and as prayer needs came up, I would write them on a card, and every day the children chose a card. So they learned by that process to intercede for other people, to have compassion on them, to lift them before the Father, and they saw prayers answered. So that was very important to us, to have that first.
Yes.
After that, with the lesson plans, the most important thing, I stuck to old school, the 3 R's. Reading, writing, and arithmetic. Often they would read to me while I was either cooking, or if it was a bad day outside, we couldn't go jogging, I would be doing my exercises while the children sat and read aloud to me. Really, this is real life, so I'm not trying to paint this pretty picture that we were all just sitting at the table all day. We were not.
Yes.
We had to be very creative with teaching. Certainly there was that, desk time. Arithmetic was the goal was to have that done before noon, so the children were alert and ready to really put in that effort that arithmetic does require for them, that concentration daily. And it was also a good motivator to finish before lunch, because there are those children who would just stretch it out, and we had to make our own schedule and not let them take 2 hours to do math. So then there was the writing, the handwriting. We did penmanship. That was important to me, that they all had good penmanship. It seems to be a lost art nowadays.
Yes.
We spent time in creative writing. Sometimes it would be based on the history that they were studying or the science, but more frequently, I had the children write what was in effect a journal. And they could write creatively, and I would correct it. But we have kept these journals, and they're just precious memories. So things like spelling tests were often given while I was either making lunch, sometimes even dinner. I would call out the words.
So creative.
Yeah, you have to be creative when you have so many kids. And we would lump together the history and science as many age groups. I shared the mural before, and so it was with studying. If we were studying American history, the older kids, of course, went in depth, and the younger kids were at their own age level. But we were, as much as possible, we tried to keep those history and science together. Of course, that changed as they got older, but in elementary years, it worked quite well grouping the kids together.
Yeah, and I think that would be one of the first questions, like how on earth do you teach a kid, someone in kindergarten and then your child that might be in sixth grade, do you have to teach different levels? But grouping them together, it's very creative and very interesting. And like you said before, most people, they think they will be stuck in a house all day teaching. However, you said that there was a lot of fun and excitement that goes along with homeschooling. Why don't you share with us some of the extracurriculums and what they look like?
Sure. We were always part of the local homeschool group. As a matter of fact, I often served on the board in one capacity or another. And the local group was a great place for organizing field trips to farms, to fire stations, factories, zoos. We went to the Franklin Institute in Philadelphia and Center City, Philadelphia. One of the best field trips of all time was one we went to the Jersey Shore dolphin watching. That was fun. Going on a boat and watching the dolphins swim alongside beside us. The children were also involved in athletics. The homeschool groups provided soccer teams, basketball teams, softball teams. We would go to meets, sometimes an hour away, so that kept the kids physically active and interacting in group sports. One of the most enjoyable things we did was the ski club. I organized a ski club for homeschoolers because it was the best way to afford, actually, to have so many children ski, because, you get a free ticket every time you reach 15 skiers in your group. That was a great motivator in the winter for the children to do their work, because they knew, well, next Tuesday's ski day, and if your work's finished, we can go.
Wow.
The kids were also involved in science fairs throughout high school. It's a great teaching method. They were involved in theater. Every year virtually every year, they were involved in a play production. So we really wanted to emphasize to have fun and make it an adventure.
And some of these extracurriculums, they count as credit towards some of their learning, correct?
Absolutely. Yes, they do.
Yeah. And it just sounds like so much fun and so exciting. And, it's really engaging with your children, spending time and bringing them up. And, we look at the biblical view of, older women teach your younger women. And then, of course, your older daughters can teach the younger ones. And it just seems like such a beautiful picture that you're painting, Hedy, that is really making a wonderful expression of homeschooling in a way that's more creative and exciting and effective, to bring up our children that way. Wow. Now, I know that years ago, it seems like they have a lot more for students today than they did years ago. How do homeschoolers today get tested?
That's a good question, because there are many different ways. First of all, there are weekly tests that are built into the curriculum. So I was often asked, how do I know where my children are, if they're on the level they should be? Well, that was rather easy to assess, because after each chapter, there's a chapter test or a unit test, and gauge, going by that, you can gauge quite well what they are comprehending. Then there are the annual tests. There's the Iowa test, the Stanford Achievement Test, the California Achievement Test. Those are given either through the local homeschool co-ops, the homeschool groups. Sometimes state groups do that, and other times even the local schools have testing that homeschoolers can participate in. And as far as the local schools, it depends on the state you live in and what the law actually is for that particular state. It does vary state by state, but there are many options to have your children tested.
And just as you mentioned, the law, I'm not sure if we did cover that in the first segment, if we had time to cover that, but just so you know, folks, it is legal, and it's still legal in many states, I believe. And Hedy, where does someone begin, as far as the legal part?
The legal part would be contacting Homeschool Legal Defense Association. That would be the first step. They are a national advocacy group for homeschoolers. Michael Farris, who started this back in the 80s, was a real visionary. He saw the need for it. And nowadays, it's so much more than just a legal advocacy group. Because they do provide the legal information for state and national laws, they also provide news, events. They will have seminars online. They offer online classes, constitutional law, which is one that Michael Farris himself teaches. My children took that course. They also offer world history, calculus, and much more. They have an annual membership, but you don't have to be a member to peruse their site and to look at the news, to look up the state regulations. You can do that all without being a member, and that would be the first stop for anyone interested in it, would be going to www.hslda.org.
We're with Hedy Negron, and we'll be going on a break, so please stay tuned. We'll be right back as Hedy continues to give us her wealth of information on homeschooling, and we're going to talk about what are the red flags that we see in the educational system today. Is it time to homeschool? Stay tuned.
In 2 Timothy chapter 3, we read that men shall be lovers of their own selves, covetous, boasters, proud, blasphemers, disobedient to parents, unthankful, unholy, without natural affection, truce breakers, false accusers, without self-control, fierce, despisers of those that are good, traitors, heady, high-minded, lovers of pleasure more than lovers of God, having a form of godliness, but denying the power thereof. From such turn away. They will be ever learning and never able to come to the knowledge of the truth. Thank you for having a love for the truth.
If you just tuned in, we're talking to Hedy Negron, homeschool mom for 25 years, and she taught 5 children successfully. Hedy, from what I understand, we talked about what constitutes a family, and, basically in the beginning, you mentioned it in segment 1, that it's really important to have a healthy, God-focused family. And yet today, from what I understand, they're teaching that a family can be many different people, not necessarily, mother, father, husband, wife, or parents. And I know that that's being taught in kindergarten. And there's various genders that are being taught right from the 3rd grade. I see this as a red flag. If you're a Christian and you want to bring your children up in the ways of the Lord, I see that alone is a red flag. What are some of the other red flags that parents should look for in their children's studies from public school?
Right. There's quite a few. But the first one that you mentioned with the sex ed, I would tell parents that it's time consuming. But parents have to read their children's texts. They have to know what the child will be given. They have to meet with the school and find out what the curriculum is, what the lesson plans are. When will they be teaching sex ed if you want your child in that school? You already mentioned, how is a family defined? And can their child opt out? If they can opt out of it, how? What is required? Because you don't want to send your child in school. They come home one day and it's already been taught. You want to find out before it's too late. So that's the first thing. Parents have to be ahead of the ball in this case. They also need to be aware of the children's texts concerning history, particularly political history. Is secular humanism taught, or any other odd types of religions, or, occultic stuff being taught? Is political correctness being taught? How is communism taught, or is it even taught? Is the curriculum actually training children to think with a communistic mindset? And as Christians, you should be aware why communism is so evil and so wrong. It's based on atheism. It's based on their belief that there is no God. So parents really need to look through the books that their children will be using, and they will have red flags. And in some of those cases, you can counteract it. You can teach the correct thing at home. And in other cases, you might look at it and decide that, no, this is not something I want my child exposed to. And then start looking at homeschooling or an alternative to it. We haven't even mentioned private schools. There are other alternatives to the public education.
Right, and you were also saying in reading biographies, we just had a recent conversation, what should they look for in that?
Oh, absolutely, because what you want to look for is a biography that has been written by someone who can be trusted. You want to make sure that what your child is learning about that person is truth. As far as what I shared earlier about Christopher Columbus, there have been new things coming out about Columbus. There have been new things coming out about Thomas Jefferson that you have to really question, is this valid, is this truth, and what is it based on? So go back to the old writings. Go back to, if you want, to Columbus's own writings. They're available. They're out there. They're very difficult to read, but they are there. Wall Builders is a group that has written great history books for children, and that's a really great place to start, to look for their website and look at what's been written from a Christian perspective based on old writings by the people themselves.
Listeners, I'm sure that you've seen many red flags. I'm sure you've talked about many discussions around your dinner table about what your children are learning. And if you're not, you should be concerned with them. But, I guess the big question is, Hedy, is, I'm sure there's some parents out there that are getting stirred up and saying, oh, I really like the idea of this. Could I take that step of faith? Will God honor this? And I can say for myself in many aspects of my life that, yes, God is a faithful God. When you take a step of faith, He's there. He provides. He protects. So, if you're feeling stirred up and you feel like this is the way I need to go and the Holy Spirit's convicting you, take that step of faith. And I guess, Hedy, if a parent decides to homeschool at this point, their children are, in most cases, are already in school. Some in the southern states, they start in August. Now it's September, late September. They're probably saying, oh, gee, do I have to wait? Do I have to wait another school year? Can I get started now? What advice would you give that parent?
I would say that you can absolutely withdraw a child from school, but you must be very careful to abide by the law, or you can find yourself in a legal mess with truant children, where the state comes in and threatens you with taking the children away. It can get pretty ugly if you don't do it correctly. So I would suggest, as I mentioned before, Homeschool Legal Defense Association. contact them and find out what your specific state's laws are. Abide by them. Homeschool Legal Defense will let you know who to contact in writing, make sure it's always in writing, and what other steps you must take to keep it legal. But yes, you can withdraw your child. Homeschooling is legal in all of our states. And if you feel that you are called to it, by all means, pray and obey what God has shown you, but do it within the bounds of the law.
Mm-hmm. And that was Legal Defense. Can you say that one more time? That website, what was that?
Homeschool Legal Defense Association. So the website goes by the acronyms www.hslda.org.
Mm-hmm. That's www.hslda for the legal process. So how, now they've gone through the legal process, which really shouldn't be very difficult as long as they just follow the guidelines. And now how do they get connected? Where do they begin?
First step after that would be to find a local group. And again, I would Google that for finding a local group in your area. They abound. Find a state group. All states have a state homeschool group. Mm-hmm. Find like-minded people at church or in your community. Nowadays, I'm sure it's so easy to find other homeschoolers. I would imagine virtually every church has a family or more who homeschool because it's become quite popular. Mm-hmm. Find those people, ask them questions, ask them about their groups, and attend them and find out what they offer as far as field trips, extracurricular activities, co-ops, which are a wonderful way of coming together with other like-minded families and cooperatively teaching your children.
Mm-hmm. That's great. And then where do they find a curriculum? How can they, plan for the next year? Where do they go to get those curriculums?
Okay, so the best scenario, if someone is listening and planning for a year ahead, the state conventions are held in the spring. Mm-hmm. So again, you have to find out your state organization, find out when the convention is held. The conventions have an abundance of vendors, publishers, displays. The books are out there. You can look at them because something might sound good on the web, but then when you actually look at it, maybe you don't like the graphics. Maybe you don't like the way the book is laid out. Find something you like and that your children like. Go there to see it visually in person. Listen to the speakers because the conventions have a plethora of speakers on all homeschooling topics. Plan on spending at least an entire day at the convention. Often they are a weekend event. They might begin Friday night, all day Saturday, and then end on Sunday. But plan at least one whole day because it takes a lot of time to peruse through all that material and ask questions. You can also go online. Christian Book Distributors is one great resource, cbd.com. You can order their catalog. I'm old school. I prefer holding that paper in my hand. I like circling, the things I'm interested in, marking it up, looking at it. Google homeschool curriculums for an idea of what's out there. I did that and found that there was an abundance out there. Again, use discernment. Be careful with what you get. But I already mentioned some of the companies that have been around for many years and are well established.
And Hedy, which one would you suggest? Because I'm thinking of the parents now whose children are in school. They will not be able to attend the state convention until the spring. So obviously right now they have to get started. They have to depend on what's online to find those curriculums. What would you suggest? What were your favorite ones? I
would suggest some of the top ones you'd be really safe with were Christian Liberty Press, Bob Jones, Alpha Omega, Becca. Then there's one called Sunlight. It's a literature-based curriculum. Mm-hmm. It might be a little tougher for someone who's very new to it to start with that. again, it depends on your teaching method, but look at those. Start there. They are all listed in Christian Book Distributors' catalog. I'll give you an example of what happened. I started with one of them. I believe it was Bob Jones, and now it's 25 years ago. We're going back a while, with our son. And he was your typical 4-year-old today. Kids love to learn. He wanted to learn. He was excited about school. By November, he would be in tears when I said it was time for school. And I realized that the specific curriculum I had for him had too much writing. His little fingers weren't developed. His dexterity just was not quite there. And it was stressing this little boy out. So after praying about it, I realized, you know what? I don't have to do all 8 pages. He can just do a little bit on each page, and he's got it. So you have to be careful with the curriculum that you don't become legalistic. You watch that your child's learning, but don't take away the love of learning by sticking to a rigid curriculum.
And each child is different, too. So like you said, you can tailor the curriculum to your child's needs. Now, what are the costs of these curriculums? If I was to purchase a curriculum for 1 year, let's say, now, and are they specific to, I guess, first grade, second grade, third grade? You can incorporate maybe the younger children in somehow, like you said, in group extracurriculums. But what are the prices of these curriculums? Give a ballpark figure.
Yeah, ballpark, Cindy. I know you can get them used. That's, again, the advantage for a curriculum fair. You can go get used curriculum and spend probably only $100, maybe $200 for an entire year's worth, and it can go up from there. So you can be I was very creative in using books that could be reused. Of course, when the children are younger, you use workbooks. But with a young child, you can get a good start with $100 or $200.
We're going on another break. We've had a wonderful conversation with Hedy Negron. Stay tuned. She'll give you her contact information in our next segment.
You're listening to Love for the Truth Radio. We'll be right back, so please stay tuned.
I want to personally thank you for listening to Love for the Truth Radio. Please visit our website at www.loveforthetruthradio.com. That's www.loveforthetruthradio.com. Well, we've had a wonderful discussion with Hedy Negron as she shared her wealth of information on homeschooling. Hedy is also a researcher, conference speaker, Bible study teacher for Christian women, and of course, homeschooling mom. Hedy, you've given us so much information. I know you've sparked my interest to the point that I feel like going out there and telling everybody, you've got to homeschool your kids, you know. But I didn't want to leave out your husband, Sam. He's a good friend of ours as well. I'm sure that Sam had to play a very important role in supporting you in homeschooling your children.
Absolutely. I couldn't have done it without his approval and his help. First thing is you have to pray with your spouse. You just really have to be like-minded on that before you take on this venture. Back when I approached him in about 1988 about it, his concern was that I would mess up. He said, well, what if you mess up? Our son was starting kindergarten, and he said, well, what if you mess up? So my reply, after I thought about it a few moments, I said, well, honey, I have a bachelor's degree, and if I'm incapable of teaching kindergarten, something's very wrong. I told him I'm confident whatever mistakes I make will be corrected in the next 12 years. His life won't be ruined. He'll be successful. So that was a conversation I always remembered because we both found it so funny. But he definitely played a role in assisting us in filling in with maybe the spelling tests where they were needed. History. He's a history buff, so he really helped a lot with teaching the children history, especially as they grew older, and it just was more time intensive. He would spend the time with them going over history, and that was a terrific help. So husbands have their gifts. He is also a musician, so he would teach them music. He's a videographer, so there were times he would do a videography session with maybe a group from our local homeschool group. We had a few kids come out and learn about videography from him. So, yeah, it's a family event. I definitely did the majority of it because he was out earning the money to bring home the bacon for us. You have to be careful to take it 1 year at a time.
Right.
That is another thing I'd like to let parents be aware of. If you believe you're called to it, don't assume that you're going to do it 25 years like I did. You might hear that and just be terrified, say, oh, my goodness, what am I committing to?
Yes, yeah, career at this point.
Like 1 year at a time, as God leads you. If he leads you to homeschool when they're young and lay the foundation, just trust him to show you when that time has ended, because he's so faithful, he's so good, he will.
And how can our listeners get in touch with you, Hedy? I'm sure there might be some out there that have questions.
Sure. They can contact me at my email. It's hedysylvia@comcast.net, and I'll spell it now. HEDYSYLVIA@comcast.net.
Thank you, Hedy, so much for your wealth of information and sharing your testimonies. It's been a wonderful experience. Thank you, audience, for listening. We'll see you next week.